Okay, so good evening, welcome to this meeting of Melksham Town Council. So before I start, I'll ask if there are any matters of public, do you need to do your introduction again?
Right, good evening everybody. Just to let you know that the full council meeting will be live broadcast onto YouTube. We also have some people on Zoom. I'd ask that all those on Zoom, if you wish to speak, can you turn your camera on? But during the meeting and you're not speaking, if you turn your camera off and mute yourselves. People in the room, if you're going to speak, if you could say your name before you start to speak, that will allow the camera and the microphones to locate your voice.
Okay, thank you, Linda. So good evening. So before we do anything else, we'll deal with any matters of public participation. Pam, hello.
Hi, just a couple of things. I just wondered whether there was any update on the Friends Garden. And, you know, because I think it's at least 2 months or so since there was the problem, obviously, with the spiritualist church needing to find a new trustee. And also I wonder whether the council could advise whether the money has been, whether the council has been recompensed for the spend that it made on the public system last May for the Zoom meetings that wasn't actually successful.
Okay, thank you very much, Pam. I will make sure that you get written responses to both of those questions. But I can tell you that with the Friends Garden, the matter is actually with the other side at the moment. As I said at the last meeting, tragically, one of their trustees passed away, and their lawyers are having to work out what they have to work out in order for them to sign the lease. I have actually signed the lease on behalf of the town council now. It is all in the other side's hands. I'm not in a position right now to be able to answer the financial question, but I will ensure that the clerk sends you a full written response. Are there any other matters of public participation? No. Okay, so let's move on to the agenda to receive apologies for absence.
Yeah, Councillor Alford, Councillor Lewis, Councillor Mortimer, Councillor Oakley, Councillor Price and Councillor Raby.
Lovely, thank you very much. For those aren't aware, unfortunately, poor Sue has succumbed to the dreaded. She was very sorry not to be able to come along this evening. Okay, any declarations of interest? No, okay. Minutes of the previous meeting. So we've got the minutes of the meeting held on 24th of January and 21st of March. Are there any matters of correction that people wish to make to those? Carl.
Just to say it says that I was present, I wasn't.
At which one?
Are you on about the full council? I'm sorry.
Yeah, the meeting of the 24th of Jan and the 21st of March.
Yeah, I wasn't present at that meeting.
24th of Jan. No.
Definitely still.
So we'll get that correction made. We can just cross them out, can't we?
Yeah, and then cross them out and then
Have we got the numbers sorted there?
yes.
Yeah. What year? Oh, I do need to do the vote. I'll propose them from the chair. Do I have a seconder? All those in favour? You forgot to tell me off.
Let's have a look here.
Oh.
Lovely, thank you very much. Okay, now the accounts have come back to us. I have to admit, I thought we said these went back to finance before they came back to us again, but the clerk says it was the missing report is now published or something.
They're the same finance reports.
If it's the same finance reports as we brought to the last meeting, in the last meeting, we found that they weren't right.
Yeah, they've been corrected.
We were missing one, weren't we? I thought this was going to go to, my understanding is that we resolved for it to go to finance.
I thought we'd resolved it to go to finance. I would be more comfortable if this did go back to finance before it comes to us again, because there were so many queries on it that.
I think it was about one report that said it was a list of payments, and it was actually a list of receipts. Yeah, yeah. So that's everything else is exactly what went to finance, apart from petty cash.
Yeah.
Which hadn't been to finance.
With such questions over it there, and with Councillor Mortimer having sort of a more encyclopedic knowledge, as when she was in the meeting, we resolved for it to go back to finance. I just think if something was awry and we just sort of passed it through, would.
Should we do that then? Yeah, I can't recall that. I apologise, but if you look in the agenda and in the last agenda, most of the reports, apart from one that was queried by Sue, and that was her only query, that the list of payments was actually showing receipts. The rest were all resolved or noted by the Finance and Admin Committee. And like I've said, yeah.
Sue wanted to query the electricity for the.
Yes, she said if we are going to do it, there's some queries that Sue has emailed in.
And that's why she was querying about it being receipts and not payments, because she wanted.
I wasn't aware of any of that, so didn't go back to finance.
I hate to suggest this here, but what is the effect of putting this through to a committee at a time when Sue, who has the questions, can actually raise them and discuss them, because she has no way of feeding back and coming back to us.
I mean, I have to say, I think that last time we resolved to send it back to finance. Last time we didn't know we were going to be meeting now at that point last time. So personally, I don't think that there's going to be any more issue with us just saying, no, let's send it through finance again so that we're all happy and certain. Okay, so I'm going to propose that from the chair. Do I have a seconder? Colin, all those in favour? Excellent. Next item. Right, number 5, financial risk assessment. So the risk assessment is on page 31 to 36 of your hymnal. This is the financial risk assessment for the council. It is an important document, it talks us through really what is it just what you've said or what the auditor has said as well in terms of
the auditor that you are required to approve it every year, and I haven't made any amendments other than to change assistant to the clerk to deputy to the clerk. They're the only changes, and I have reviewed it.
Did anyone see anything in that they want to ask questions over, or can I move that we note that? So we resolved to approve it. So it's been before as before.
It's the same one that came last year. Every year you are required.
So we've not updated it from last year?
No, the only update.
The job title, fine. Okay, so I'm going to move from the chair. We adopt that. Do I have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Aids. All those in favour? Lovely. Right, okay, so neighbourhood plan. We're still looking for some willing volunteers for some stuff on the neighbourhood plan. Linda, do you want to talk us through?
Yeah, I've sent a couple of emails about this, and I'm keen that Melksham Town Council is represented in the same way that Melksham Without is. The pressing one is the housing allocations subgroup. Currently, we've obviously got 2 Melksham Without parish councillors on that, and myself. And there is a meeting arranged tomorrow, but it's really key to the neighbourhood plan that we get on with that work. It's tomorrow at 2 o'clock.
Yeah, it's pretty soon. Oh, it's soon.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
All right.
Okay, so are you happy to be the ongoing town council representative on that working group?
Yes.
Lovely. I'll propose that from the chair, seconded by Simon. Was anyone else desperate to do that and now feeling put out because they're not going to have the opportunity?
It's really exciting.
It is.
Okay, let's just appoint this post first.
Yeah,
Okay, and then I'll
Yeah.
take any other questions on it. Okay, in which, because I thought for a minute you were volunteering to do it.
No, I won't. Well, no.
Okay, so we've got Pat proposed to do it, seconded by Simon. All those in favour? Storming. Any other questions on the neighbourhood plan? Colin?
Yeah, the canal link, is that a separate thing and we have to represent?
Yes, no, town council representative is required for that.
Yeah, I think I'd
Proposed from the chair that Colin does it, seconded by. We'll go with Jackie because she was nearest. Did anyone else have a pressing desire to do this? All those in favour? Storming.
Is that your new work when you haven't this?
Anything else on there?
Yeah, it's the last one.
Oh, strengthening existing heritage policy, creating a local list of heritage assets. This sounds like your cup of tea, Graham.
Graham's the one on the implications for the bike.
So what was that?
The strengthening existing heritage policy.
The soft voice of our town clerk.
Oh, that you're already on
You've
the
already
bypass.
volunteered for the implications of the bypass subgroup, haven't you?
Yes.
You're welcome to do two.
Well, to be honest with you, I was suggesting Graham Cooney because I know that the history side of it is an area of interest.
Stuff there.
And somebody who knows what they're doing is always a good idea.
Do they conflict?
They won't conflict because of officers, Teresa and myself will try and service these from the officer perspective.
Right. That is fine, provided it fits, you say, my timing over the next couple of months. I'm not away a lot.
They meet by Zoom, good news.
So
They meet by Zoom.
bad news, they've got a ship that doesn't accept Zoom.
Okay, so I'm going to propose Graham from the chair. Do I have a seconder? Okay, I'll go with Simon this time. Actually, no, I'll go with Pat this time because then we've got a variety of seconders and I can make you. Okay, all those in favour? Excellent, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Cooking on gas here. That's a lot, yes? Yep. With your permission, councillors, I'm just going to whiz things around very slightly on the agenda and try and do the quicker things first and then come back to the Assembly Hall as long as we still have time. Because we've got a few other things to deal with and we're not staying late. So item 8, CCTV.
Just a quick question. I've had a very special request about item 7.2. Could we just not deal with that one, please?
Could we not deal with it?
I mean, could we deal with it now and not wait till later?
I'll make sure we do it before we go. Okay. Item 8, CCTV protocol. So we've got a proposed protocol in front of us. I'm really keen that we do try and get ourselves to the point where we can approve this because the lack of the protocol is holding up us able to take this work forward now. But I'll hand over to the chair of the CCTV working group, Colin, to.
Right, thanks, Chair. Yes, it's important that we do get on with this. I just want to ask, is there a mechanism? How do we go about accepting it, but leaving it open to tweaking? Because there are a number of issues. 2 examples, and I think a few things are going to come out of it and need looking at in detail as it's implemented. But for example, there are references in one of the documents, references to CDs and DVDs, which just worries me a little bit about how up to date it is. And another issue it actually talks about in terms of the rapid deployment cameras. It talks about degaussing tapes, and that worries me a little bit. So, and some of the references in there do go back several years. So I'm not suggesting it stops us accepting it, but is there a way of doing it where we can address those
Yes.
in detail?
I mean, our choice tonight is we either adopt the policy and therefore have a policy in place and can proceed, or we refer the document back, refer the policy back and ask for revisions to be made and bring it back again. But there's any policy that's adopted by this council can be revised at any time. What will need to happen is for that policy to come back to council with the recommendations for updating it, and council can debate and choose whether to take on board those changes or not. What we can't do is, and the clerk will correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure I'm not on this, what we can't do is adopt a policy and say somebody can make changes to that policy, or some group can make changes to that policy without it having to come back here. But there's no reason why we couldn't adopt the policy tonight in order to facilitate cracking on with the CCTV project, allow the working group to go through it line by line and make whatever updates they want, and bring that back to us in 3 to 6 months for with some recommended changes.
I would say that was quite acceptable, because none of the issues I mentioned are showstoppers, that they are things that just will need looking at some point. So yeah, I'd go along with that.
Okay, anything else? Simon?
I've raised concerns about this in previous meetings since, for as long as we've been discussing CCTV, but have always supported it on the understanding that we would iron things out as they go along. But I can't vote for this tonight. I mean, my key concern, as I've voiced to this council on a number of occasions now, is that I think there needs to be some democratic process where we can, whereby CCTV isn't imposed upon a community because they're seen as a trouble area. And we've discussed this notion, and in fact, I trust Linda, but I can't, in all honesty, knock on a door of a resident and justify the process that we're voting through. And these Home Office guidelines make clear there should be an open, transparent process when used in this context. And personally speaking, I helped write and vote through a budget that put money aside for this, and despite my reservations, I'm not trying to obstruct the council, but I can no longer support this until we've properly discussed some sort of democratic process for the deployment of this CCTV.
By democratic process, Simon, are you saying informing a community that is happening and giving them the opportunity to feed back? Or are you saying that where something goes out in the community, you feel there ought to be some sort of vote within that community as to whether it happens or not?
I don't think there should be a poll of the community, but I think that the councillors have to be involved in the process of the deployment of this. So there is some sort, we live in a representative democracy. Each of us here represent a community. There's got to be some process of feedback to the decision making of where this is deployed. And currently, as we've discussed it, I've sought these assurances time and time again, actually, and we're getting to the point now where I'm asked to vote to adopt a policy which doesn't give these assurances. And this is not to cast any assertions on our officers. As I said, I personally trust them to make the right decision. However, I cannot justify that to a resident who doesn't know our officers personally. I think if we're voting through a framework that's going to be built upon, at the core of that, I believe we've got to have some sort of councillor input as to where these are deployed. And whether that comes to, you know, whether it works in the way that we do catchy requests, someone puts in a motion, we discuss it, you know, whatever way a resident who feels for whatever reason they deeply don't want a town council CCTV camera outside their house, they've got to be able to feed that through to the council in a way that there's accountability.
Go on, Colin.
Yeah, can I ask, are you mainly concerned with, I think you raised this in particular when we were talking about the rapid deployment cameras, but are you talking about any cameras?
I just, in principle, if we're putting these out in residential areas, so say, for example, the skate park, a member of the public can now choose not to use the skate park if they don't want surveillance. However, if I lived on a street that this council deemed to be a problem street for antisocial behaviour, and I've voiced concerns about what we believe to be antisocial behaviour before, but at the moment, if we deem that to be a problem, we're going to put this on a residential street. There is no way in which I can say, absolutely not, I do not want that camera there. That's what concerns me. And if we go away and we have this sort of process, you know, then I'll be prepared to support it. And I've tried not to obstruct this. As I say, even in the budget, putting the money aside, that I was involved in the process of creating that.
I think one thing I would say is that putting cameras in residential areas, it has never been something that we have ever considered. What we talked about is using a deployable camera if the requirement was there, if residents were actually asking for it because of problems. I can't, all I can say is that I've never come across a situation where there's been a problem, anybody hasn't wanted it dealt with or helped to deal with by putting cameras for only as long as they need to be there to solve the problem. The actual protocols put a requirement on CCTV operators to define exactly why a camera's going somewhere and to determine how long it is. So it's only there for as long as it's needed to resolve a problem. I can't imagine a situation where a permanent camera goes into a residential area in Melksham. I think that would be very, very, need a lot of careful consultation and consideration.
Simon, I'm going to let you come back, but I'm just going to ask the clerk to talk to your question as well for a minute, because she's obviously done the research and put this together. And then I'll let you come back, and then I've got an idea forming in the back of my mind which I think might solve the issue, but let's just let Linda.
I completely understand your concerns, and any camera system that a public body has to be publicly advertised. And I'm gradually putting right some of the anomalies that we've got here, because none of our cameras are identified as belonging to Melksham Town Council or have a contact number on them. Now, with a deployable, it used to be that you had to do a consultation process before it was deployed, and you'd also have to put notices up to say that a camera was going to be in situ. Now you can actually put a deployable up without that, but you still have to advise people in the vicinity that there is CCTV surveillance in operation. My experience of deployables in the past has always been for big events to support the police. And obviously anyone attending that event would know that there was going to be a deployable camera there. But there's nothing to stop the council actually doing consultation if it was deemed to go into a residential area. Again, it's a matter of whether it's allowed through the protocol. I've included in the pack, I know there's lots of documents, but there is an awful lot of hoops to jump through to make sure you're compliant before you operate closed circuit TV system for a public authority. And the surveillance camera code of practice gives councillors a guide about how things should and shouldn't happen. And I am the data controller. I have to be, as head of the organisation or head of the paid staff and an employee of the town council. And I would not allow anything to happen that is incorrect. And it would concern me if it did, and I would certainly call a halt to it. But I do understand your concerns, and I don't think there's anything wrong if there is an issue in a neighbourhood where we're liaising with the police and the community safety partnership to say, actually, if the police say that some camera system would help for a couple of weeks, that it could be considered, but that the residents know. Now, in other instances where I've been involved with a deployable camera, the residents have actually asked for it because they're concerned. And what it does, people say drug dealing is a big issue and it's going on all the time. Finding someone on CCTV will not lead to an arrest because the police cannot be sure that drugs have exchanged hands. But what it could do is the police would have a look at the footage, and that would alert them to think, actually, we should do some patrols. But I do take on board your concerns, and I'm sure the rest of the council do. I understand exactly what you're saying.
Can I make a suggestion, Simon? And I'll let you come back on this, but I think that the point you're making is very valid. And I think it is probably something that requires a protocol to be put in place about perhaps adoption of sites, particularly adoption of sites in residential areas. I'm really worried that we defer this yet again, which stops us from being able to use the technology in things like public events that the clerk has talked about, somewhere like Primrose Drive Nature Area, where they've had some real issues, and we could put a redeployable in where it's not looking at anybody's home, it's looking at open space. So I'm going to make a suggestion, which is that we could this evening adopt the policy so that we can move forward, but at the same time say that it's the policy of the council that until we have a suitable protocol in place, no cameras will be installed that have oversight of a residential area. That is where they could see a home that somebody lives in. So somewhere like Primrose Drive, where we've had these issues and we know we've got problems, we could, if we wanted to, work with that community group there, crack on with it. Conacher Mead, we could work with that community there, crack on with it. But shining one down Church Street because we think louts are walking down there drunk and someone's objecting, we can't do anything there until we've got a new protocol in place, which would include how we properly communicate and liaise with local residents about CCTV in their area.
And can I add, if a camera does go in a residential area, there's also a survey done, and if that camera can see into anyone's window, it's actually blanked off. The camera can be programmed so that it blocks that window off, so you can't see in.
To speak to Colin's point, sorry, there's
Yeah.
points to go through. I do completely get that, and Colin, I trust your motives, which is why, despite my natural instincts on these things, I try wherever possible to be supportive. And I have no intention of breaking the consensus of this council. I'm glad that we work together on issues such as this. The simple fact that we've spoken about it in principle means that voting this through means that we have a framework in place that could lead to these things. And I think that when you're thinking about voting something through, you have to think about the worst case. And Linda, thank you for your comments. As I've said before, I would trust you to do the right thing, but it's about telling my residents, that fact. And I would also add that the Home Office guidelines are the minimum standard, whereas Melksham's a small community, and we should be aiming for something a lot greater than the minimum Home Office guidelines. And Councillor Hubbard, I won't be urging my fellow councillors to be voting against it, but at some point I've got to stop and take a stand on this, and that I have supported it. And, you know, as I said, even from the budget, but despite it is something, the fact, you know, that I have great reservations about, I've never tried to stop it. I've actually voted in favour time and time again when you know, when it's been discussed of it, yeah, that's fine, despite airing my concerns. But at some point I've got to stop and say, actually, I can support it no longer until I have those assurances. And even if we say it's not to be used in residential areas, you were still passing through this road without actually getting something concrete. And that concerns me, not necessarily in a practical implication. As I said, I completely trust Linda and I trust Colin's motives. It's the point of principle that I can't support in good faith. And I'm sure people here will disagree for perfectly legitimate reasons. In fact, you know, antisocial behaviour, drug dealing, all need to be targeted. And I don't in any way cast doubt over the motives of any council here that votes it through, even if I'm vehemently against it, because I think they're doing it for the right reasons. But it's just, I'm coming at it from a slightly different angle. And I can't, without having something watertight guaranteed that we're, you know, voting through, I can't support it, I'm afraid.
Okay, well, thank you, and that's the joy of democracy, that we all each get to be able to make our point. And I'm going to open up and ask if anyone else has any questions on what's in the protocol or issues about the protocol they would like to make. Graham.
I just find myself wondering if for the public watching and seeing this and seeing this very good debate, which I'm very much on both sides, I can see both elements of this here, if it's possible to put together something like a one-page summary for the public to let them know what we're doing.
I think that, yes, I think it's important we get the message out about what's happening, and in a very friendly way that signposts to the relevant accompanying documentation. So yes, I think. I
don't know if I'm the only councillor who's struggling to read these 100 pages.
They're not the most thrilling of documents to read, but fortunately there's a little bit of that's what we signed up for when we became councillors. So
I appreciate that. On the side of the DVDs and CDs, by the way, I would see that from a quick read through. That's what we will do if we have any of those media. If we don't have any of those media any longer, I don't think that necessarily applies. What one does have to look to do is to actually modify the things to update current and new forms of media. Can we be assured that that covers all current forms of media? This stuff will be stored on such as the cloud. Does it cover the cloud?
I don't think it does at the moment. There are a number of issues along these lines.
But the system that we've got doesn't put it in the cloud, does it?
Not at the moment.
No.
Not at the moment.
So the system we've got puts it onto what?
The hard drive at the moment, which is where you, and then you download.
Or hard drive chip.
A physical hard drive located in the.
One of them things that's actually
It's currently one of those things that spin.
Physically switched about. Okay, and that is covered. Thank you.
Gary.
Yeah, just a question to Colin on the actually surveillance as such on the cameras. I read today there's like 2, 3, 4 hour shifts to look at surveillance. I'm not sure in what context. I'd like to get that context to say, right, who's going to be looking at these and when, and is that just for the town cameras, or is it for a specific identified threat that people will be looking at?
I think Linda is probably Clark's probably the best person to actually answer, I think.
At the moment, because it's not actively monitored, if the police request footage, then it can be downloaded and put on whatever media storage device is permissible. So it's not actively, I'm just making sure I get it right. What an ideal situation would be to use volunteers to monitor it.
Yeah.
You find that volunteers who live in the town actually understand and get to know the feel. It's also, as I've said before, CCTV and being monitored can actually save people's lives and get ambulances and get aid to them. It's not all about looking for what's not going so well in the town. So a volunteer scheme, it can be really successful, and it's been proven in a couple of towns that it is actually better than paid professionals because people understand the town.
It just mentions 24 hours and I thought.
24 hours is a bit ambitious, and I do think, you know, yeah, 24 hours is not, it's not possible.
Specific time frames you would have thought, definitely.
Yeah, working with the police. I mean, a good system would have, you'd have the police radio. When your CCTV volunteers came on shift, they would let the police know at HQ or the team that were on duty that night, and the CCTV would also know what officers were on duty, so they can do point to point, so they can get immediately hold of them without going through 101.
Okay, thank you.
Jackie.
Say you use volunteers, will they be trained and go placement training?
Yeah, they would be trained. The town council would pay for that. I mean, the town council needs to agree first that it would like to set up a volunteer scheme to monitor the CCTV, but the town council would be responsible for that.
What, I mean, we could all volunteer, but it doesn't mean to say that we are going to follow the guidelines. What principles would be in place to make sure that they're not abusing the system? And
I've had that before, but
I'm going to let Clark answer that, and then you can come.
an officer here, probably a part-time CCTV manager, would manage all the volunteers, and there are checks done occasionally, and I have had to dismiss CCTV volunteers for inappropriate, you know, viewing. It's like having an employee. In fact, I've always said that volunteers are people that just aren't paid. They're just as important. They're still trained. They do SIO training. They would train with the police. They probably go to police headquarters and get ideas about, you know, if they were having to follow something or follow an incident, the best way to do that. So they would be, and they have to do that volunteering and that training, and they have to do some SIA training. It's not just anyone can come and volunteer, they have to be checked.
And they would be checked?
Yes, yeah.
Did you want to add to that, Colin?
Well, I was just going to say that although there's a lot of documentation there, a lot of this is already covered it's dealt with quite thoroughly in that. Yeah.
Any other questions or queries? The one thing on it that, and I think we could deal with this evening if we were so minded, but I think is very important is updated, is really, it's the section 4.1, the control of CDs and DVDs, and talk of this. I think that ought to be control of removable media.
Yeah, I've been trained on.
And I think that it needs to reflect that you know, if the police come along now, they're going to give you a thumb drive. They're not going to give you a CD or a DVR. But under this policy at the moment, we wouldn't be able to use the thumb drive that they gave us. So I think we need to reflect in 4.1 that thumb drives, USB thumb drives. But I would like to have in that it should be USB thumb drives either as provided by the police or provided by the data controller.
They have to be provided by the data controller.
Yeah, but I'd want that to be expressly written into that, so that's absolutely. Okay. Anybody got anything else? Right. Okay. In which case, I'm going to. Do you want to propose this, Colin?
Okay, there's some, the first one, the Home Office Surveillance Camera Code of Practice. Council's obliged to adopt that code in order to operate a public CCTV system, and then we need to approve the procedure manual, bearing in mind the changes that you've just suggested. The rest are just for noting or for information. And just to be, these are self-assessment guides, they don't go anywhere, but I or whoever its responsibility is to manage CCTV is from the officer point of view, will on a quarterly or at least half-yearly basis go through these impact assessments to make sure that we are complying and make sure that we're keeping up to date, because changes do occur very rapidly.
Okay, so 2 votes to take then. The first one is literally to say that we are adopting the Home Office's code of practice. So we don't get to write that, but we're adopting it, saying that, as Simon said, minimum set of rules that are in place, but that we're signing up to make sure that we would follow those, whatever. And then we'll go on and do a vote on our own protocol. All those, I'll propose from the chair for this one that we adopt the Home Office's code of practice, surveillance camera code of practice. Is that seconded? Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Could I see all those in favour of adopting the Home Office surveillance camera code of practice? Could I see all those against? And those abstaining? Okay, so we've then got the council's closed circuit TV system internal operations procedure manual. The proposal is that we are requested to adopt that with the amendments that we've discussed in terms of removable media rather than CDs/DVDs. And I would still like to actually add the caveat that we will form a protocol that can sit as an appendix within this procedure for when any cameras would be shining or looking in an area where there are residential dwellings.
Yeah, it's actually governed.
No, but I'm asking that we have a protocol that's put in that takes on board the points that Simon has made in terms of, so, and until such time as we have completed and adopted that protocol, none of our cameras should point at residential dwellings. Then I think that or any new cameras, can I say any new cameras? Because we have got some existing ones that have been there for years and I don't want to suddenly have to go and take those down. But I do take on board very seriously the points that you make, Simon, and I think that they are valid. I'm just desperate not to bring the whole process to a halt, but council gets to make that decision. So are you happy seconding that? Yeah. Okay. So I'll take that to the vote. Could I see all those in favour? Could I see all those against? And could I see abstentions? Okay, so that was 6-1. So the policy is adopted. Thank you. Okay. Speaking of policies, let's go on to 9. We've got a few here. Which of these are new? Which of these are renewing?
We've already got a publication scheme, but I can't find the old one, so it's new, but it's it just advises people what's available. It's like
Yeah, so the publication of those, I mean, it's summed up in the introduction, isn't it? That's adopting. I want to take these one at a time because I think it will be quicker. Did anyone have any questions or concerns on the publications scheme policy? Okay, in which case I am happy to move from the chair the adoption of the publication scheme policy. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Simon. Could I see all those in favour? And we're back to unanimous, lovely. Recording of meetings policy. Supplementary, of course, to the guidance within the Local Government Act, or the rules within the Local Government Act, which give people various rights and permissions. but this is a policy that will talk more about how we will deal with recordings and how we will process any information from them. Did anyone see anything there that they wish to question or have issue with? Okay, in which case I'm going to propose that from the chair. Do I have a seconder? Seconded by the deputy chair. All those in favour? And we're unanimous again. Lovely. Okay. Roundabouts, gardens and planters sponsorship policy. This is new, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Can someone talk us through this to make sure that we thoroughly understand what it is that we're signing up to here?
Yeah, can't do it. Sure.
Present, there aren't any schemes in place for the sponsorship of the council's gardens and planters. The council does have sponsorship for its roundabouts. We have adopted roundabouts where the sponsor agrees with the council that they're going to adopt the roundabout, but at the moment they landscape and maintain the roundabout at their own expense. We're trying to move away from the adopted scheme and more towards a sponsored scheme where the sponsor pays us as a town council an agreed amount. It doesn't necessarily have to be just one sponsor per roundabout. It can be between 1 and 4, depending on the access points on the roundabout to the road. We're just trying to harmonise the town council's approach to its roundabouts. It's been a bit haphazard, for want of a better word, over the past years, and to encourage more local participation, which is why we're introducing sponsorship of some of the town's gardens and the opportunity to sponsor planters as well. By doing it, it's going to hopefully bring more revenue into the town council, which will then enable us to enhance these assets, and also perhaps with things like Farmers Roundabout, which is a key access point to the town, perhaps consider enhancing that with art sculpture and making it a proper feature for the town. There are various conditions which are listed in the policy. They are hopefully self-explanatory, and hopefully you've read them. Highway and planning considerations we do have to follow. We're bound by Wiltshire Council as far as the roundabouts are concerned. We have to get Section 96 licences for them. I think that is pretty much it.
Lovely, thank you, Patsy. So any questions for the office? Carl?
My question was going to be about the roundabouts. With the roundabouts being listed here as, I think there's 2 that can be sponsored, does that limit us to sponsoring any other roundabouts?
No, we're quite keen if we can to try and take on some of the new roundabouts around the Eastern Way, if we're able to. Certainly not, no.
So does listing them here as just those 2, does that limit us in what we can go for, rather than just saying any roundabout that we give permission to?
It doesn't limit us in what we can go for. Those are the only 2 that we physically can advertise for sponsorship at this point in time.
No, but I think the point that Carl is making, and I think is a valid point, is if in our policy we stipulate the roundabouts that we could have, if we adopt this tonight and next week Wiltshire say, yeah, the roundabout at the end of Snowbury Lane, okay, you can use that now, we would have to bring the policy back.
Yes.
Perhaps we could say sponsorship of roundabouts applies to any roundabouts that the town council has agreement with highways to manage.
We can make an application to enter a 96 agreement with Wiltshire Council Highways, and I don't think they'd probably, I think they'd probably have our arm off.
Yes.
And I think there is, and I think if we start with the 2 that have been identified, but my next approach was to find out whether the roundabouts on Eastern Way could come under town council, we would look after the sponsorship of it. Because we have had several businesses very interested in sponsoring roundabouts, and they're a little bit boring right now, and it'd just be nice to pretty them up.
Just before I come to you, Graham, I just wanted to come on one thing. I don't like seeing Marketplace Roundabout here for sponsorship. It was long the policy of this council, when we've spoken about sponsorship in the past, that the roundabout immediately outside the town hall, which is regularly used for that sort of iconic view of the town and all the rest of it, should be one that was free of sort of sponsorship signage and all the rest of it, and was the one that the town council could go to town on, if I can use that phrase, in terms of what we do with it. I recognise that probably it would be the highest earning if we were going to rate them and all the rest of it. But I really do feel that what I would hate to see is, if someone shows you a photo of Melksham, if you're looking somewhere there's a photo of Melksham, 9 times out of 10, it's that picture across the marketplace of the roundabout and the town hall and so on and so forth behind. What I would hate to see personally is, whenever you're seeing that view of the town and sponsored by whoever, I think something's above it. So I'm going to, I may not even get a seconder for it, but I'm going to move an amendment that actually says sponsorship of roundabouts would apply to any roundabouts we have the relevant permission for, but specifically exclude the Marketplace roundabout, which will always be maintained by the town council.
John, because I was going to put my hand up and ask about it.
Yeah, excellent. So, but Graham, you had a point.
I've got the question at the moment. Is it the Semmington Road roundabout is adopted at the moment? And how does this, with I think the comment I heard there from our deputy clerk was that we're looking to move from adoption towards a sponsorship scheme.
Semmington Road roundabout isn't ours, it's Melksham without.
That's actually Melksham without. Okay.
Yeah, the ones along Western Way get more and more interesting because the boundary actually runs through the middle of some of them. The one at Bower Hill, for instance, I think it's 1/4 us and 3/4 parish or something like that. But there are a whole host of other ones that are 100% town. Even the one at the top of Snowbury Lane going over to Campion, nice big roundabouts there.
Do we have anything actively adopted at the moment?
Farmers Roundabout.
So Farmers Roundabout.
We haven't got a section 96 on any of the roundabouts. Currently, the scheme that's in place is a company will sponsor a roundabout, and they organise the maintenance of that roundabout. They usually use a contractor, but that agreement is with Wiltshire currently. If we want to take responsibility, we would have to enter into a section 96 with Wiltshire Council, which would allow us to take over.
Would then be considered of the people who've been maintaining that roundabout, or be contractors or adopters or whatever, over a number of years? It becomes less relevant because I'm thinking of specifically of the Semmington Road roundabout and what's been done on there. I hate to keep the existing people off.
But it's not ours, so we wouldn't be able to.
This is the scenario, so then take it over on a town team, which already seems at times to be stretched.
Yeah, the main sponsor, the one that does Farmers Roundabout, is sort of like I think it's made us look at and examine how we're maintaining roundabouts as a whole, and because the sponsor has fallen away, there isn't anyone sponsoring that currently. It seems sensible to see if council had an appetite to do it in a different way.
Right. Okay.
So the sponsorship of roundabouts would apply to roundabouts on which the town council has a section 96 order. So that can be the wording, if we could use that in that wording for the amendment that I'm proposing.
Who decides to apply for the section 96 order?
Well, that's the next question I was about to come to, which is
that
that
decision is made by the council, then we don't need to have the amendment for the marketplace, obviously we don't apply for it.
well, I assume we already have a
Already got
section
one on that
96 on
because
it.
we maintain it.
So I think that there's a couple of things in place here that I'm going to suggest tonight that we adopt this policy if we're interested in doing roundabouts, because then we can just crack on. But that we actually ask the officers to do is go and do an audit of the roundabouts that we've got, because what roundabouts are, there's a lot of roundabouts around the town that qualify. And what we really need to look at is then, do we want to, as a town, just say we want a section 96, all of them? Do we want to, we've got to bear in mind, Wiltshire are currently talking about revisiting, and they're about to release the new asset transfer policy. The one thing that concerns me slightly is the whole thing about this is they pass things to the town. So the town, and it's all meant to be revenue neutral. If we've taken on some of this stuff that costs a lot of money before they're talking to us, we may not get as good a deal on other things. So it might actually be in our interest as a town to sit on our hands for a few months anyway. And then as part of the negotiations on the asset transfer, say we'll take on looking after all the roundabouts. Because that's a cost to Wiltshire Council at the moment. There's a revenue cost to them on it. And what they're all about is reducing their revenue costs. But they're coming out with a new policy, and we will be under the new policy, not under the old one that Bradford and Avon have just got their deal on. But we can still adopt this, so we've got it in place. Okay, so anyone else wish to speak to this? So I'm going to propose from the chair, subject to the amendment that I went through. Does anyone need me to do the amendment again, or are you happy you understand it? Yep, okay, so proposed by the chair, seconded. Colin, all those in favour? That's everyone, lovely. Thank you, folks. Reserves policy. So we have an existing reserves policy. Are there any dramatic changes? So this is just re-adopting the existing reserves policy, which is a legal requirement we have to do as a council. There are no changes to the current one, so I'm going to propose from the chair. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Jackie. All those in favour? That's everyone. Thank you very much. And lastly, the no fly posting policy. Again, any changes?
There's no changes. It was approved by the last council, and a few members have asked about our sort of like stance on people that put posters up. So not long into my tenure here, we came up with a no fly posting policy. The town council is taking a soft option in terms of sort of like, we will take any down that are offensive, like advertising, and keep the offending banner or poster for a week. And if someone who put it up wanted to claim it, they could. It's not like we're going to fine you, because it actually, in certain places, it is actually unlawful without proper planning permission. So it's just so that town council has got a policy and can sort of like look after the town a bit, to keep it free of lots and lots of posters in bus stops. The town council, they belong to the town council. You could take the harder route and do SPNs, but that's much harder, and I think it's nicer to be sort of like take the soft approach, but keep on top of it to keep it tidy.
Thank you, Carl.
So with the soft approach, because that was going to be one of my questions, I think it was during COVID that we had those quite nice motivational speeches just put around Melksham, and that was a lovely idea by someone. We would be able to say, actually, that's not offensive to anyone. We're quite happy for them to stay up in the meantime.
Yeah, and then they're not advertising. I mean, I don't know if you recall, by the Southern Electric by Farmers Roundabout. Used to drive past that, used to Ventura, and it used to be full of banners. And I spoke to the SSE, said we'd adopted this policy. Could our team take them down? And they do, and they keep a check on that, and they'll take them down if any go up. It's just an example of where this has worked.
Yeah, just gives us a bit of control.
Any other questions? So I propose from the chair that we re-adopt this, seconded by Carl. I assume you were seconded? Yep. So could I see all those in favour? Wonderful. So item 10 just had 3 items to note, so we don't need to talk about those. They're just there for information. So we can go. back to item 7. Now, I am mindful, councillors, that we've got 2 confidential items which we really do need to cover off tonight. So I'm going to do 7.2 first because I promised, and then we'll just check that we've got enough time to have a proper discussion on 7.1. Because I do want to give at least 15 minutes for the confidential items that we need to cover. So 7.2, there's a request to install a plaque on the Assembly Hall. And am I right that the drawing in our agenda on page 49 is the plaque that we want to put up? The home of
The one that they're asking for permission for, yes.
right. And what size is this going to be?
I'm not sure to answer your question. I'm sorry.
I mean, because that's a significant factor.
And plaques aren't normally bigger than A4. It's normally A5, aren't they? But
Well, I suppose he wants it to fit one of the bricks, so it's not going to be bigger than one of those bricks, is it?
But the red bricks.
You wouldn't read it.
Yeah, that's right. I keep thinking it's
No. Yeah, it's not a vast stone brick, a little brick will be around that big.
Sorry, yeah, I was just thinking of the other one that we've got down there. No idea is the answer to that question.
How do people feel about this? I mean, I think that there's 2 things that we need to discuss here. First of all, is the principle of allowing third parties to be able to put stuff on the Assembly Hall, because once we've allowed one group to do it, you've set a principle that anyone can come along and ask to have it put on there, have a plaque put on there. And then secondly is, if we accept the principle of putting one on there, do we like what they're proposing we should have? Carl, you had your hand up.
Just a really nitpicky thing, I suppose, and tell me if it's wrong, but I'm just aware that the picture, I mean, is that Teddy from all the cards? In that case, is there a copyright claim on that? Because I'm just thinking that's
It's who, sorry?
Teddy.
It's a trademark.
Yeah,
If I
so
look at the cards we buy, you probably have received a card with his face on it, I'm sure. But I'm just wondering if it's copyrighted. The only reason I ask is because
No, you breach of copyright, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
I think we need to check, don't we, to ask him for more details and to point out that, you know, I don't think we can decide anything tonight because there are too many questions. I mean, we don't know the size of it for a start, do we?
Okay, Gary, you were wanting to come
Yeah,
in.
also, again, it's going to set a principle, as you said, of what we're going to go going forward. And then you're going to have a policy of lots of things you can consider, how long have they got to be using the hall before they can have a plaque, how big's the plaque going to be, where's it going to be? And there's lots of questions to be answered.
Okay, I'm going to come back to you, Pat, but did you have your hand up just now, Graham?
I didn't, no.
No? Okay. Colin.
I was just to say, I understand what the point Carl raised, but shouldn't we first decide on the principle of a plaque, because it might be academic, because we might not agree unanimously that we want to allow a plaque.
I think, yeah. Oh, Claire.
I was going to say, I quite like the idea of a plaque for people who use the hall, you know, on a long-term basis. I mean, the right one in the right place. I know it says principle, but it shows the hall's being used. It shows the hall is home to something. And people who are visiting for other things might look at these and go, oh, they do that. and it might spark an interest, an ongoing interest. So I just think it's quite a nice idea.
Yeah. Simon?
And just really briefly, because we said we'd sort of discuss the principle of the plaque, I think the principle I'd be in favour of, the home of something, I think we'd have to agree how long they've been using it for, and a sort of format to have some sense of uniformity. But if it is the long-standing home of a given club or community group, I think it would be a good idea to have a plaque. So as Councillor Forgap said, if you're going there to go watch a pantomime, you might think, oh, well, they do model racing here, or do some X, Y, or Z. And I think it's a good way to sort of recognise that our long-term bookings, this is actually, this is the home of that club, rather than, they rent out the hall every Thursday night.
Okay. Well, I was just letting first-time speakers go through first, and so if everyone who wants to first time,
Actually, just strikes me it's very common to see, this is where the Rotary meets, or this is where some other group meets. And I don't think that's actually even onto long-term stuff. That's simply an established regular booking, even after perhaps a year or two.
Okay, Pat, you wanted to come back and then Colin.
I'm sort of not against the idea of a plaque, but to me it seems more like the sort of thing you might see hanging in the bar, a framed picture or something, rather than something nailed to the wall outside. So I just wondered if I was to go back and, have a word and see what happens, but, just make a suggestion.
Okay.
I was going to say that is something I would support, because then it could be a number of them.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
I could support
It's the
that.
sort of thing you see in a bar, isn't it?
Yeah.
A theme or something.
I would support that in preference to a permanent plaque.
Okay, right.
Hugh, can I ask you, as the head of operations and sort of responsible for everything that goes on there and all the rest of it, what's your experience from in the trade? What's your thoughts on external plaques that?
I think an internal plaque is a better idea, definitely. Normally you put, if you've got I don't know, like an Investors in People, or from the leisure industry, Quest is like the British standard. You might put that on your doors or somewhere near the entrance, but I wouldn't put a club insignia there. But inside or in the bar, has been suggested, yeah, definitely. And I was also looking up at that kind of thing, where the list of the names of all the previous mayors, and I thought, maybe because as you say, once you start doing one club, the model car club will want something, and then it goes on.
So two questions on that, if I could.
Yeah.
And this is throwing ideas into the debate as well, which is, first of all, should we be talking about somewhere in the bar area or the lounge or the foyer having a board where we say we can put something up for everything that's happening here? Because I really like that idea of, you can look at it and see what happens at the assembly hall. We've got all these different groups that do stuff. The other question on that is, the challenge with that is that, this week we might have 10 organisations, so you divide it into 10 and say you can fit an A4 one. But then in 6 months' time, we've got 20 organisations, and you haven't got room to fit them in, and they're overpinning each other and all the rest of it. So then you go to or whether you have a screen. We already have the information screens, and whether we have one that was perhaps dedicated to just organisations that are here and when they're there or whatever, that can rotate through and show these things, so that, there would be a small cost in that in terms of buying a big screen to hang on the wall, but they aren't very expensive nowadays, and the software to drive these things is free. Yeah. So that gives us an unlimited opportunity to be able to promote the organisations that are happening at the hall. I don't know how people feel. I'll go to Pat and then Carl.
Well, yes, but I think the foyer that we've got at the Assembly Hall is too small for something like that. It's not a place one tends to loiter in, because it gets too crowded too quickly when people are coming and going. But yeah, in principle, yeah.
Which, the board or the electronic?
Well, whatever, but not in the foyer is what I'm saying.
Okay. Clark?
I do like the idea of having a sort of small plaque for something that's 20 years or over, or has an actual set time, because I think it's a great milestone to reach in terms of the community group. And I think that should be celebrated, that we do have long-term things here. And sort of advertise that further. What that looks like is different to whether we actually have something in place, I suppose.
But are you that plaque internal or external?
Internal.
Internal.
Right next to it.
Okay. Claire?
Yeah, going back to the screen, I've got a feeling people wouldn't look at a screen. I know myself, you know, there's so many screens around, I wouldn't look at it at all. I mean, what's on board is great, but it would have to be a feature, a proper feature to draw the attention, to get people to look at it. I know everyone's saying internal. The only reason I like the external on the wall is you have people queuing up to go in, you have people walking past it, you have people who smoke and go outside and look at it, and they're more likely to stand, linger, look at the wall, where inside you're going in for a function or you're going to the bar, you're not necessarily there looking at what is around you. That would be my
No, I think it's a very valid, Simon.
Yeah, I sort of agree with that. And I like the idea that once you get past a certain milestone, once your association with the council and the assembly hall has gone on for such a long period of time, that there could be some sort of recognition externally that this is, you know, the assembly hall is the home of this club. And that's quite a permanent thing. And I think we'd have to be very careful of, you know, defining what that length of time is and a format, and to make it look uniform and smart. But I do think that it's more likely to be noticed if it's a plaque outside. And I think that the challenge would be making it look presentable and uniform. But if someone's been booking the hall for a decade, you know, it is mutually beneficial. A, they have a permanent home, but B, we've got a, you know, permanent client for the use of our hall. So it's mutually beneficial and desirable. And I think that having the ability to think that, you know, if we stay here for, you know, 3-4 more years, we're going to get recognition outside of this assembly hall is actually, you know, it's the base for, you know, I don't know, the Women's Institute or whatever, might attract people to want to think of a more permanent relationship.
Okay, Gary.
I'm just, part of that point was about what the plaque looks like, because if it was a Melksham Town logo with a home of this club, it would look more in keeping if it was multiple, rather than an image that's very bespoke for that club, which could not be, might not be seen in the right context. So I just think a bit of uniformity.
Oh, sorry.
I've just got a little idea. I'm just thinking, sorry.
Can't understand. Shall we just take that and then I'll say
Gary took my point, and I.
Okay, fine.
Maybe instead of getting groups to actually, or allow them to have a plaque, why don't we reward groups that have hired the venue for 10 years? So after 10 years of hiring the assembly hall, you will get a plaque and you get a roll of honour.
Yeah.
And so the town council actually do it,
yes.
And then you can have brass or have it.
I think there's a whole host of different options that have been talked about tonight, and I think, oh, shut up. A whole host of different options have been talked about tonight, and I don't think that there's a developing consensus of one option. And I'm very mindful of time. So I'm going to make a suggestion from the chair. Hugh was complaining to me when I bumped into him last week that he's not got enough to do at the moment. He was really quite upset about not having enough. Well, you heard him, didn't you, Patsy? No, but I am thinking that there's a host of questions here we need to answer on this. Is it indoor? Is it outdoor? Is it a plaque? Is it something that we make available to anyone who has regular use of the hall? Is it something you can only have after 20 years? What's the impact? What's the commercial implications and all the rest of it? And I just wonder if this is something where the sensible thing to do is to say, this has been a really good debate. There's been a lot of ideas come out of it. Hugh, could you take that away, think it through, and perhaps come back with some suggestions to us of how that could be done in a manner that's going to facilitate better. I love the idea of letting more people know about what's happening at the Assembly Hall. I take absolutely on board all these points about how we can make it most accessible to people to actually look at, but at the same time about not putting something on there that makes it look less than it is or a bit cheap or whatever. So I think that there's food for thought there and a report coming back, and we could then take that on to the next stage. And we're just, I'm afraid, I think just have to say to Jeff, can you bear with us while we explore how we do this? But I'm really worried that what we've got before us this evening, we don't know how big it would be. We don't know if it would actually be able to put it up there anyway, because it's probably got copyright in it. And frankly, I don't think it looks very good anyway. And I think something on the hall promoting that that's what it is great, but that's not a great example of what it could be.
A good starting point, though. It's good someone.
We're agreeing tonight that we're going to ask the head of operations to take away everything we've talked about and come back with suggestions for a principle that we could be adopting. So we're saying, yes, it would be a nice idea if we did something, but we're not saying it'll be outdoor, we're not saying it'll be indoor, we're not saying it'll be posters, we're not saying it'll be a notice board. We're asking you to make some sensible suggestions that are actually implementable, and think through the implications of we stick one up and then 20 other people ask us to put stuff up, and suddenly it looks like a casino outside rather than.
But it draw people in. Make people look.
Potentially, or it would drive them away. So I'm going to propose from the chair that we do that. Do I have a seconder for that support? I've got. Well, look, can I just say, keep your hands up and all those in favour, and pick any single person, because it was a unanimous seconding.
A unanimous second. I don't think I've ever written that before.
Thank you very much, folks. We haven't got time to do 7.1 if we're going to do the I'm so sorry, Ben.
That's quite loud, isn't it?
No, I was apologising to Ben because he stayed here all evening to talk about the Assembly Hall.
It's fine.
I'm going to let you go home early.
Well, I was asking you the question earlier, what we couldn't do. I mean, I think there's it's going to be the challenge for whoever is in this seat from in 5 weeks' time. But I do think we either need to have more full council meetings more regularly, or we need to stop bringing so much stuff to full council, because I can't remember one that we finished in a timely fashion for I don't know how long. So whether, you know, we need to look at what comes to full council, or whether we just need to say we need to do these meetings every month. But
didn't we used to do that?
Yeah, we used to have a full council every month. Yeah.
I think I said previously when I was on council, I don't think we ever run over on a full council meeting.
No, we were normally done by 9.
Yeah, and all the meetings were sort of done and dusted now.
So I think we need to perhaps explore that for the new calendar, but anyway, we still got to cover these things, so I'm going to kick Ben out. Thank you very much, Ben. I do grovel and apologise to you, Hugh, because it's twice that you've been stood up at the altar. Good night, Ben, thank you. Yeah.
And lock it on.
Do you want to go put the bag bit on? Yeah. We're going to put the magnet on the front door so that nobody can wander in. Yeah, we're resolving to go to, so I'll move, we go into confidential session. I have a seconder, Simon, all those in favour? Thank you very much indeed. You're probably talking to this anyway, aren't you? Oh, you're going to end? Yeah, turn us off. Good night.